Set, okay, here we go. So, as we all know, the BarRoom Project presents me, Kiss Rock Review. And today I'm doing this ad lib because I left my notes at home, so we'll see how it goes. But as always, don't forget, if you're watching on Facebook, to like and follow Kiss Rock Review and the BarRoom Project. If you are on YouTube, like and subscribe to Kiss Rock Review and the BarRoom Project. And if you follow Kiss Rock Review, probably for the next 5 months, I'm going to do a list of the musical artists in my music collection, A to Z, and it's going to start tomorrow. So, with the Allman Betts Band, because that's the A. So it's going to be a lot of Allman for about a week, but
okay.
So,
that sounds pretty good.
Yeah. So today, what we're going to do is our topic is going to be first and last albums by various bands. And on the screen right there, we have the Greek letters Alpha and Omega, which means the first letter of the Greek alphabet is Alpha, the last letter is Omega. And for those of you who don't know, that's actually a biblical reference. In the Bible, the book of Revelation, Jesus calls himself. He says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And it's Revelation 22, if you really want to know. Right, Father Joe?
I don't know.
Okay.
I'm off. I'm not getting paid tonight.
Okay. Anyway, I figure a lot of people New Year's, they talk about ending one year, beginning a new year, so I thought that would be appropriate. First and last albums for this. And it's not a definitive list, it's just when I wrote this earlier this week. These are the bands that I selected. And just so you know, it's studio albums, so there's no greatest hits compilation like the bands like to release after they've broken up. There's no live albums. There's no archival releases or demos. Just their first and last studio albums, and it's bands that are pretty much bands or artists that are pretty much not going to make any new music. So, for example, I don't have the Black Crowes in here because the Black Crowes, even though they haven't made a record since 2009-10, are actually recording a new album as we speak. So, they didn't make the list because they're not going to have their last album's not going to be a different last album pretty soon. Anyway, so I wrote this. I put these in alphabetical order. So let's get going here. So our first group is the Allman Brothers Band. And you know what the name of their first studio album was called? It was called the Allman Brothers Band. Very creative about that. 1969. That is the cover of the album, the original version of the Allman Brothers Band, with Greg, Dwayne, Barry Oakley, J-Mo, and Butch Trucks. And what happened is that Dwayne was a session musician. Actually, his brother had this band. They're out in L.A. Band was called the Hourglass. Broke up. Greg stayed in L.A. to record some solo material. Dwayne went back to Georgia and northern Florida to do some session. And while he was doing the session work, he got together a group of musicians that would eventually form the basis for the Allman Brothers Band. They just sat there and jammed. He called up his brother and said, I got this group together. You got to come. So Greg came. And they threw lyrics for the song Trouble No More at him, which was a Muddy Waters song. And there was the birth of the Allman Brothers Band after that. On their first album, you got some classic Allman Brothers songs, Trouble No More, for example. You also have Dreams and Whipping Post. And just so you know, Trouble No More was the first song Greg sang with the band. Also, when they had their final concert in 2014, it was the last song they sang together. So they sort of bookended the band with those two songs. Okay, jump ahead 45 years. As I just mentioned, they broke up in 2017. But their last studio album came out in 2003. It's called Hitting the Note. There's what the album looks like. Between 69 and 03, they had a few lineup changes. By the time they recorded this, the original, just Greg, Butch, and J-Mo from the original band were in the Allman Brothers. But they were joined by some other musicians. Warren Haynes of Government Mule, Derek Trucks, who was Butch's nephew, had joined the band. This album has 11 songs on it. Warren Haynes actually co-wrote 9 of the 11 songs. 5 of them he co-wrote with Greg. It wasn't a big, there weren't a lot of hit singles on it, but I think on rock radio doesn't really rely on singles. Some of the songs got played. A song called Old Before My Time is on here. They have a cover of the Rolling Stones' Heart of Stone. One of my favorite songs, which, unless you follow me, it's called Desdemona. It's a nice little 9-minute song, but concert, of course, is 15 minutes. That's what they do.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, that was the last line of the Allman Brothers, and they disbanded, I said, in 2014. 14, but they only ever recorded, it was the longest lasting lineup of the Allman Brothers, but they only recorded that one studio album, which I always thought was a shame. They should have recorded more. But I'm not in the band, I don't have to write the songs. So, check out both the Allman Brothers and Hitting a Note. Let me know what you think. We're going to move on to the next band, which is, A, next is B. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through the whole alphabet. With the Beatles. The first studio album by the Beatles was Please Please Me from 1963. And that's the cover. Very typical, like, old 60s album cover, I think. What had happened is they recorded 2 singles, Love Me Do and Please Please Me. They were both big hits. So the record company, EMI, said, well, if singles can have hits, let's put out a full album of 14 songs. The problem was, even though that Lennon and McCartney were prolific songwriters at that point, they didn't have an additional 12 songs. So what they ended up doing is they had this live repertoire, and literally, Please Please Me was their live show. Live show recorded in the studio. And the Please Please Me album was recorded in one day. They started at 10 a.m. They finished at 10:45 p.m. Recorded 12 songs in a day. And half of them were covers. Chains, Boys, Devil in Her Heart, which are all covers. And of course it ends with Twist and Shout, which is also a cover. Most people think it's the Beatles' original, but it's actually the Isley Brothers. And they had to record that. It had such rough vocals, and John Lennon had a sore throat. They only got one take of it, because his throat was so bad by the time he finished recording it. And for this album, the Beatles got paid each Beatle got paid £7 and 20 shillings, which was the standard going rate for musicians getting recording at that time. Of course, they made more money than that later on, and that's the Beatles' first album. And then 7 years later, they released their last album. Does anyone know what it is? What? No. Let It Be.
Let It Be, yeah.
Let It Be. Actually, Let It Be was actually recorded. Let It Be was the last album they released. The last album they recorded was Abbey Road. For those of you who don't know, but there are 2 documentaries about the making of Let It Be. There's Let It Be, which is a film released in 1970, which was a 2-hour documentary, and that basically just shows the conflicts of them making the album. But recently, Disney Plus released a documentary, 8-hour documentary called Get Back, which is about, I guess there's something like 60 hours worth of footage and 160 hours worth of audio. And so Peter Jackson, who did The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, made a documentary with all the unused footage. And that's much more comprehensive. It doesn't just it shows some of the conflicts, but also shows them just in the studio having fun, hanging out. It actually shows, they actually have the time when Paul McCartney was just jamming there on his bass, and he came up with the basic beginnings to Get Back, just sitting there, which is, but my favorite part actually is Linda Eastman, who became Linda McCartney. She brought her daughter into the studio at one point, and her daughter is named Heather, and little 7-year-old girl, and she gets up there and starts playing the drums with Ringo. And that's like my favorite part of the whole 8-hour documentary. But anyway, Let It Be, it was recorded, parts of it were recorded at a movie studio. Part of it was recorded in Apple Records offices. And then, of course, the famous part of it was recorded up on the Apple rooftop, which is the last time the Beatles played in public. And it was recorded in about 3 weeks. In January 1969. Then, after it was done, the Beatles, 3 weeks later, they started recording Abbey Road. And they recorded Abbey Road, and they released it in September 69, I believe. And the record company saw they had all this material from the Abbey Road session, or from the Let It Be session lying around. So they gave it to Phil Spector, and he mastered it, and he put strings on Long and Winding Road and Across the Universe. And Paul McCartney hated the strings on Long and Winding Road Across the Universe. But interestingly, if you watch the documentary Get Back, they asked Paul McCartney, "Oh, what else are you going to do with Long and Winding Road?" He's like, "Oh, I might put some strings on it." I guess you just like the Phil Spector version of it. But anyway, as I said, Abbey Road was released in September 69. Let It Be came out in May 1970. And something like right around the same time, Paul McCartney announced he was leaving the band. So that literally is their final studio album that was released. And they just had a big deluxe edition of it come out too. Okay, let's move on. Next up, it's not C. Actually, it is C. Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young. So they were very creative with their first album, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. There's the cover.
Yep.
That band, if you don't know the history, came about. Stephen Stills used to be in the Buffalo Springfield. They did the song "Stop, Hey, What's That Sound?" David Crosby was in the Byrds. Graham Nash was in the Hollies. This album came about because Stephen Stills, the Buffalo Springfield had just disbanded. Crosby had just been fired from the Byrds. They began hanging out, jamming. Stills had this song called You Don't Have to Cry that he and Crosby would play together. They went to a party at Mama Cass from Mamas and Papas. They were playing the song. The Hollies had been in town playing a concert. Graham Nash listened to him. He's like, can you play it again? And when we started playing it again, he had a high harmony vocals. And I was like, wow, we just got to make an album. So they ended up making the album Crosby, Stills, and Nash, which contains Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, which was written about Stephen Stills' girlfriend at the time, Judy Collins, who has blue eyes. Wooden Ships, which Stills and Crosby wrote with Paul Kantner of the Jefferson Airplane. Marrakesh Express, which is a song Graham Nash wrote, which was actually rejected by the Hollies at one point. It's an amazing album. Every song on it is good. I would pick it up. I actually have a couple copies. I have it on the original copies, and they came out with a deluxe edition later on. Then when they went on tour, they realized, well, we can't just go on tour with the three of us. It's going to be like a folk band. We don't want to be a folk band. We want to be a rock band. So they added Neil Young, who was Stephen Stills' partner in Buffalo Springfield. And then they would go on to record Deja Vu with Neil Young. But Deja Vu wasn't their last album. Their last album came out in 1999. It was called Looking Forward. Didn't sell a lot of copies, but this is what it looked like. And that's Henry Stills on the cover. That's Stephen Stills' young son, playing with the master reel there. What happened is that Crosby, Stills, and Nash had lost their record. Some people say they lost their record contract. Some people say they left Atlantic Records. Whatever. They didn't have a record contract. They decided to finance an album on their own. Neil Young heard about it. And Stephen Stills invited him to play on a couple songs. And he got up there and they were playing some other songs. He's like, hey, can I play on that song too? And they started recording another song. And Neil Young was like, hey, can I play on that song too? And eventually, instead of it being a Crosby, Stills, and Nash record with Neil Young being the guest, it became a Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young record with him fully participating. He and Neil Young had just recorded his own solo album, so he offered Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Here, he said, take any song, the album I just recorded, take any song you want. They, of course, took the three best songs, came out with Looking Forward. It's an okay album, not the best. It's the last album they recorded. I like the song Looking Forward. A song called Dream for Him, which David Crosby wrote about his son. Stand to Be Counted. Someday Soon. And it's a decent album. It's not anything great, not spectacular. The Crosby, Stills, Nash, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young broke up in 2014. And they didn't record any other studio albums after. They put out a lot of some live albums. So let's move on. The next group is The Doors. By the way, their first album is called The Doors. There it is. Just so you know, this year is the 50th anniversary of L.A. Woman. I'm not sure on that. But their first album was The Doors, which has Light My Fire, The End, Backdoor Man's on it. Alabama, what's that song? What's the Way to the Next Whiskey Bar? Oh, Don't Ask Why. That song. Anyway, whatever, that's on there. For those that don't know, The Doors started, Ray Manzarek, the keyboard player, was in film school. Jim Morrison was in film school. They were kind of talking. And even though Jim Morrison didn't play any instruments, he would write songs. He would write a melody and he would sing it. And Ray Manzarek heard about that and said, we got to get together and have a band. So that's how they were eventually joined by John Densmore and Robbie Krieger and put together the album The Doors. A lot of people think L.A. Woman is the last Doors album, but it's not. It's the last Doors album with Jim Morrison. He went off to Paris and died in 1971. Yeah. And the Doors remained a trio. Other Voices and Full Circle were two albums they put out. But then they discovered Jim Morrison really wanted to be a poet. They discovered some spoken word poetry that Jim Morrison had done. And they decided to put some music behind the spoken word poetry. So that album is called The American Prayer. The last Doors album, studio album 1978. Actually, it says American Prayer, Jim Morrison with music by the Doors. But it's just, Jim Morrison reading his poetry with music behind it.
I have that album. I have that for I have both.
Oh, okay.
On vinyl. See if I don't. It would have been cool if we should have.
Never mind. Okay, so I think one of the songs on there, one of the poems on the Stone Immaculate, American Prayer. streaming service somewhere because they're all
Somebody's selling it somewhere.
yeah. Okay, next up we have Genesis, the band I just saw in concert twice. Anyway, their first album was called From Genesis to Revelation. That's what it looked like. Very impressive cover, huh? Like the Black Album by Metallica there. This album was recorded when they were in school. They were teenagers when they recorded this album. The guitarist for Genesis, his name's Mike Rutherford. He's also Mike the Mechanics. I saw an interview 2 or 3 months ago with Mike the Mechanics, the lead singer of Mike the Mechanics. He said one time they were backstage and all talking about their high school bands, and Mike Rutherford's like, yeah, my high school band was called Genesis. But this was recorded, they were in the summer vacation. On summer vacation, they went to a boarding school with the original members of Genesis called Charterhouse in Surrey, England. One of the graduates of Charterhouse was a guy named Jonathan King, who was a music producer. They managed to get him a demo copy of their album. And he liked what he heard, of course. They knew what the type of music he played, so they changed their style to be like that. And so he financed the first record from Genesis to Revelation. Of course, there's nothing on the cover, and a lot of music stores put it in the religious music section, even though it's not. And it's the music on it's okay. It's what you would expect from a bunch of high school kids playing music to appease the producer. It's okay. It's nothing spectacular. According to Tony Banks, the keyboard player for Genesis, it sold all of 600 copies when it first released, mostly to their schoolmates. They eventually left that producer when they all graduated from school and decided to become a full-time band, and then just got signed to another record company. And I believe they recorded about 15 albums. The last album Genesis recorded was Calling All Stations in 1997. That's what the cover looks like. At that, just so you know, Phil Collins is probably the most famous member of Genesis. He is not on either From Genesis to Revelation or on Calling All Stations.
Yeah.
After the We Can't Dance album, Phil left a few years after, and Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford, the other two members of Genesis, decided they wanted to continue the band. So they enlisted a guy named Ray Wilson. He was in a Scottish grunge band called Stillskin that had a minor hit in the UK. He sort of sounds like Peter Gabriel. So that they hired him to do that album. And I bought a copy of that when it came out. I like that album. I know a lot of people don't. And I can understand why. It sort of has a mixed personality. You got some of these great prog rock songs, and then some of these standard adult contemporary bubblegum songs. And I think they didn't know what to do, basically, when Phil left. But a great song on that album is called The Dividing Line. I really like that. It's great. As long as I can hear Tony Banks keyboard solo in Genesis, I'm all set. And that song's got a bunch of Tony Banks keyboards. Let's move on to the next band. We got not even a band, Billy Joel. His first album was called Cold Springs Harbor from 1971. There's what it looks like. He's from Long Island. He was in a bunch of bands when he was before this. He signed a solo deal with a small Long Island record company, and if I had my notes, I could tell you the name of that record company, but I don't have my notes with me. They produced Cold Springs Harbor. The problem is that when they recorded it, they mastered the song too fast. And when Billy Joel heard it, he's like, I sound like Alvin and the Chipmunks, not Billy Joel. So he managed to get out of his record contract. This song has, what's that? She's Got a Way About Her on it.
Yeah.
But it's the version most people know is from a live album. So then Billy Joel signed, I think it was Columbia Records he signed with, and the next album was had Piano Man and Captain Jack, and went all the way up. And then I think his last pop album came out in '92 was The River of Dreams, but his last album was actually called Fantasies and Delusions from 2001. It's a classical album. He's a pianist, wrote all his classical songs, and you can definitely tell. I've never actually listened to this, but the song titles are Opus number 2, Opus number 3. So it's very classic. And it actually went to number 1 on the classical music charts in the U.S. So if you like classical music, you want to listen to Billy Joel, pick up Fantasies and Delusions. Okay, next up we have The Monkees. I listened to a lot of the Monkees this past month because of the death of Mike Nesmith. So their first studio album is called The Monkees. There they are, and I always find it interesting on this album cover, they're all smiling except for Mike Nesmith there. He's like yelling at everybody. But anyway, this album, Monkees only one monkey actually played any instruments on this album because, they were made for TV band at that point. This has, you know, the theme from the Monkees on it. It has Last Train to Clarksville. Mike Nesmith did provide 2 songs for it, Sweet Young Thing and Papa Jean's Blues. So the first Monkees album sold a lot. But this also, when Mike Nesmith, he was starting to get a little anxious because he actually auditioned for the Monkees simply to get his songs played and to play music, and he wasn't allowed to do that. Eventually he got his way, and the Monkees album headquarters, they all play on it. But their last album just came out, believe it or not, the Monkees' last album just came out like, it'll be 3 years ago now, 2018, my math might be up, called Christmas Party. It was a Christmas album that they put out, the 3 remaining Monkees. Before that, 2016, the Monkees put an album called Good Times, amazing album. Got one of my favorite Monkees songs called Me and Magdalena on it. By that, Christmas Party was their last studio album. A lot of traditional Christmas songs, has even a religious song on it, Angels We Have Heard on High by Peter Tork. Mike Nesmith sings Chestnuts Roasting on an Open Fire. They even got an old vocal of J.D. Jones singing Silver Bells for that album. So, next year when Christmas comes around, go to the store, download it, buy the vinyl, Christmas Party by the Monkees, and listen to it during the Christmas season.
I didn't know that.
Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Very creative title for their first album. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Of course, only Tom Petty appears in the album cover. And when this first came out, it didn't sell a lot. And then some DJs over in England got hold of it, and there's one song on it called, oh, now I'm drawing a blank. Anything That's Rock and Roll. And they started playing it. It became sort of a minor hit in England. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers went over to England, were on the show Top of the Pops. American DJs heard about it and started playing that song, started playing Breakdown, American Girl, and then the album of Gold. The rest is history. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers became a great American band. All the way up until 2017 when Tom Petty passed away. Their last album was called Hypnotic Eye in 2014. And Hypnotic Eye is the only Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers album, the only Tom Petty album that went to #1 of the album charts. But, you know, in the time after hit singles, I love this album. American Dream, Plan B on it, Red River. I would search for it if I were you. They were actually planning another album in 2017, but then Tom Petty passed away, and the Heartbreakers have never officially broken up, but it's kind of hard to have the Heartbreakers without having Tom Petty. Okay, Simon and Garfunkel. They only came out, Simon and Garfunkel only came out with 5 studio albums. They actually started in the 50s, and they called themselves Tom and Jerry, and they had a hit single, a top 50 single called Hey Schoolgirl, which sounded just like the Everly Brothers. But in the early 60s, there was this big folk boom, and Simon and Garfunkel got back together with Simon and Garfunkel, and they said, you know what, we're going to be a little different. We'll have 1 guitar and 2 voices, 2 harmony vocals. And they eventually recorded Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. Looks like that. The original Sounds of Silence, acoustic, appears on this. Go Tell It on the Mountain, which is a gospel song, appears on that by Simon and Garfunkel. They have a Pete Seeger cover. Last Night I Had the Strangest Dream is on that. Bleecker Street, an original. A song called He Was My Brother about the Freedom Riders in the 60s. Album didn't sell well until some DJs started playing the Sounds of Silence. And then their producer, Tom Wilson, he's like, you know what, if I put an electric backing on this, maybe it'll sell. So he was the one who produced Dylan, helped Dylan go electric. Said maybe we'll make Simon Garfunkel sound like the Byrds. So they made Sounds of Silence, put that electric backing on it. Album went to #1. Simon Garfunkel came back and recorded 5 albums. The last studio album was Bridge Over Troubled Water from 1970. Yeah. By the way, this is the biggest selling album in 1970. It was the biggest selling album in 1971, and the biggest selling album in 1972. What was I going to say? 25 million copies to date it's sold. Has Bridge Over Troubled Water, Cecilia, one of my favorite songs called The Only Living Boy in New York, which was written when Art Garfunkel was out. He was filming a movie out in Arizona, and Paul Simon was lonely, so he wrote The Only Living Boy in New York. He was there, and Art Garfunkel wasn't. The Boxer is on there. Unfortunately, its success led to the breakup of Simon and Garfunkel, which is unfortunate. Because can you imagine those Paul Simon solo albums that he came out with in the 70s, if they had Art Garfunkel's voice on them. But I mean, they had reunited for tours. You know, they had the concert in Central Park. But I would have loved to hear some of Art Garfunkel's harmony vocals on some Paul Simon's on Graceland. That would have been awesome. Anyway, so I got one more band that I'm going to talk about. So the band wants to get ready. This last group that I'm going to talk about is Van Halen. So we go from Simon and Garfunkel, folk rock, to Van Halen, hard rock. I have an eclectic taste, I guess, in music. Their first album was Van Halen, 1978. That's the cover. Interesting, the original name of Van Halen was Genesis. Really. And then they were in the record shop going through the records, and Eddie Van Halen came up with Selling England by the Pound by Genesis. I guess we're going to have to change our name.
No kidding.
They formed in 1973, and they just played around the LA club circuit, and they played the Whiskey A Go-Go, stuff like that. And then Gene Simmons of Kiss heard them in concert and financed the demos. Yep, and then that really didn't get them because Gene Simmons lost interest. But this one producer at Warner Brothers Records was looking for a new guitar act, and so Van Morrison's guitarist recommended Van Halen to Warner Brothers Records. So Van Halen's associated both with Gene Simmons of Kiss and Van Morrison, which is this album. You know, it's got Janie's Crying, Running with the Devil, Eruption, which is a Eddie Van Halen instrumental where he does the tapping on the neck of the guitar. And also got the cover of the Kinks, You Really Got Me. Okay. Started Van Halen, of course, we know Van Halen, David Lee Roth was in the band up until 84. Then they got Sammy Hagar, who was in the band until the late 90s.
I miss Sammy Hagar.
Then, of course, they had Gary Cherone for one album. And I think the lead singer of Extreme was in Van Halen.
No.
No?
No.
And then they sort of then they had tours with Sammy Hagar and David Lee Roth. In 2007, they had a tour with David Lee Roth, and instead of Michael Anthony playing bass, they had Wolfgang Van Halen, and he kept trying to encourage the band to record more songs. And then he found some old demos from the 70s. He's like, these would make great songs. So Wolfgang encouraged them, and so in 2012, A Different Kind of Truth came out, which was the last Van Halen studio album. It did no gold, and they were actually thinking about up through I think it's 2015. I read they're thinking about recording a new album, but of course we know that last year Eddie Van Halen passed away, so that ended any more Van Halen records. Wolfgang said you can't have Van Halen without Eddie Van Halen, so but Wolfgang, I think he came out with an album last year.
Yes. Yeah, I did.
I think he played all the instruments on it too. It's nice.
Yes, he did everything.
Okay, so that is my list. So, what do you think? Let us know in the comments what you think. Which of these albums do you like? Are there other first and last albums that you can think of? What are your musical plans for 2022? I plan on seeing the Tedeschi Trucks Band this summer. I got front row tickets for Canandaigua. They better play that show. I've had them for 2 years. Anyway, so, Happy New Year.